The phylum that contains the mollusk has a lot of organisms in it that are fairly familiar to us. So within this phylum, we have the snails, clams, octopi, and squids, and this is a very large phylum. This is going to be the second largest phylum of all of the invertebrate groups, and this has 93,000 known species in it. So this, we're going to look at 4 of the major clades that make up the mollusk groups. We talk about the general characteristics to get us started. First of all of the mollusks are going to be soft-bodied. So we say that they're soft-bodied, but many of them, if you think about the snails, for example, many of them are going to have this hard shell that they're able to secrete to cover the outside of them. So that's going to provide a bit of protection for them. That shell, and again, this is most of them, but that shell is made of calcium carbonate. And while most of them will have that hard shell on the outside, there are some that have an internal shell, and then there's other groups that have lost the shell entirely. So the octopus would be one example of that, where we've lost the shell entirely. These are going to be coelomates, so they are going to have a true coelom. And they're also going to have 3 main body parts. So if we take a look at those 3 main body parts, what we're seeing on this slide is the general structure of a snail. So that would be one type of mollusk. But the parts that they have is they have, first of all, a foot down at the bottom. The foot is primarily for movement. So just as we would think of our feet, these are going to help them get around. So these are going to be primarily organisms that are very motile. They have what they call the visceral mass, and this is going to contain the organs. And you can see on this slide that they have a lot of different organs inside of them. They are going to have also a mantle. The mantle is responsible for secreting the shell. And it secretes the shell, and then that is going to cover all of the visceral mass. So that's going to cover and protect all of those vital organs underneath. Now, other things that we have, this is going to have an alimentary canal. So we've got a digestive tract that has both a mouth and an anus to it. And these do have that trophophore, which is the ciliated larva stage. So that's where part of that Lophotrochozoa name comes from. If we take a look at 4 of the clades in this phylum, and there's a total of 7 to 8 clades total here, chitins is going to be the first one that we look at. This is one that perhaps you're not as familiar with, or you're probably not as familiar with. The chitins, these have an oval shape to them, and they have quite a different structure to them compared to the other mollusks that we tend to think about. They always have 8 plates. And these are dorsal plates, so these are going to be found on the top of them. And if you count the plates on the examples in this slide, you can see that all of these little chitins, they do have 8 shapes to them. They tend to cling to rocks at low tide, and they're quite well represented in the fossil record. The next clade that we're going to talk about is the Gastropoda. And this is the largest clade that we have within the mollusk, and this is going to include about 3/4 of the total mollusk group. This is the snails. So we have an example of the snail structure at the top of this slide. Snails are probably quite familiar to you. We have some that are going to be marine, we have some freshwater ones, we have some terrestrial snails as well. And one thing that the snails are unique for, or that Gastropoda is unique for, is this process called torsion. Torsion, the word, implies some type of twisting. And this twisting really has nothing to do with the shell structure itself, but instead this has to do with the digestive tract. So there is a developmental process that takes place in the gastropods that causes, if you look here, the mouth ends up on the bottom or below the anus, which ends up at the top. It is this inverting process that is the torsion that we're referring to here. So this is unique, having the mouth be below the anus. These are going to have usually distinctive eyes. So these eyes are going to be held up a lot of times above and out away from a distinctive head structure. That's the gastropods. The bivalves, the bi comes from two. These have two shells to them. Clams are a very good example of this, or the scallops are another good example of this. So we have two pictures of those on this slide here to give you a look at it. These are going to not have a distinct head to them, and they're primarily sessile. So there's no distinct head. And besides not having the distinct head, there's not really going to be that radula. So they're primarily sessile, but they can, we call it skitter. So if you've ever been scallop hunting, you may have seen the scallops kind of move, skitter through the water, so they can move a little bit. They can also bury themselves a bit in the sand. So when they bury themselves, notice that they tend to be buried kind of upright in structure. That makes them a little bit different. Well, they're different in a lot of ways, but that's one thing that differentiates them from the brachiopods that we talked about earlier in this chapter. Most of these are going to be suspension feeders. So when we're talking about the bivalves, they're going to be pulling water in, they're filtering that water, and they're consuming plankton, small protists, small animals that are going to be in that water. Now the fourth group, or fourth clade of the mollusk that we're going to discuss is the Cephalopoda. Cephalopoda, the name cephalo, comes from the fact that these are going to have a complex brain. So this is the first group where we really start to see that well-developed brain structure. They are going to be able to respond to a lot of different sensory stimuli. And one reason that this is important for them is because these are going to be predators. So these are active predators. This is our squid. These are squids, octopi. We also have one group within them that actually has a shell. That's a nautilus that you're seeing there. But other than the nautilus, that one group, the other two, they've lost their shell altogether. These are going to be able to, their predators are going to be able to grasp their prey, and they do that with long tentacles that hang down. And when they grab those the prey, they're going to bite them with some beak-like structures. So they have a beak to bite prey. And some of them also have some poison that they can inject into their prey, which is going to immobilize their prey. In addition to this, we're also going to have a closed circulatory system here. So this is the first group where we see the closed circulatory system. By a closed circulatory system, this means that the blood is going to be separate from the rest of the body fluids. The groups prior to this had an open circulatory system where all of the body fluids were just kind of mixed together in one central compartment.